Hello and welcome to this opening session of the Children's Media Conference 2021. We are back and so is Question Time. Morning everyone, I'm Leah Belletto, journalist and former presenter of Newsround, having worked at the BBC for more than 15 years making content for children and young people. And this morning I've spent the last hour watching Peppa Pig, Milo and then on to Go Jetters with my two children before school. And today it's my pleasure, panellists to our chat, all with lots to say about the issues facing the kids' media industry and all of us as the people in that industry and, of course, the audience who are the most important part of that equation. And we have a number of questions provided by you, so thank you very much for submitting them. Across the hour, we hope to have a lively debate and to get some answers too. Now, this session very much sets the agenda for the rest of the Children's Media Conference, and it also reflects on many of the topics that come up in the video library. And we hope you'll all be able to use those 50 videos to add to your experience. So they're available now and right through the summer, so please do take advantage of that. Now, this session will also be recorded and posted back on the platform within a couple of hours. And at the end of today's question time, there's a Wonder Chat that's in the Children's Media Conference new networking space, and you can find the link to Wonder in the red box in the session description below this live screen. Now, from 12, there'll be a chance to meet and discuss the issues amongst yourselves and meet some of the team behind this session too. And if you can't make that, then why not drop into our lunchtime get-together in Wonder from 1 until 2. And that's hosted by the lovely Jo Redfern. Apparently, you'll need to use a Chrome browser to make Wonder wonderful. So enough wonderment, and on to the questions and our lovely, lovely panel. It's a real pleasure to introduce these people to you today, and I hope that we get to some of the questions and the bottom of some of these questions. So today, I'm joined by Kate Biggs from Ofcom, with over 20 years public policy experience, which I'm sure will help us wade our way through some of these questions. The lovely Anne Longfield, children's campaigner and former Children's Commissioner for England. Hello, guys. We've also got Phil Redmond, TV pioneer and best known, of course, for producing legendary kids' TV drama Grange Hill, as well as Brookside and Hollyoaks, part of Channel 4's brand. And of course, John McVeigh, Chief Executive of PACT, leading trade association for film and TV and animation. Hello to you. And last but not least, Mitchell Simmons, Vice President of Government Relations at Viacom CBS. Hello, guys. I hope this is the last time that we all meet via Zoom. Let's hope we're moving forward, we'll be able to meet in person. But on to the questions now. And I'd just like to sort of dive straight in, really. It's been quite a tough time for the media industry, for children. But the first question is from Jeremy Banks, and he's the CEO of Calabi Group. And you may have heard in the news about the EU and the threat to sort of reduce that quota of UK content shipped out to Europe. The message has been toned down a little bit. John, I wonder if I start with you with this question. I mean, should we sort of take that threat and that possibility of that threat very seriously in terms of the content that we should be providing this Brexit?
Well, clearly it's something we identified 4 weeks after the referendum that this was an issue going forward, and indeed the industry made a whole lot of representations to the UK government about this. EU Works is covered by a Council of Europe convention, so it's not actually subject to the European Commission or AVMS directly, and the UK is still a member of Council of Europe and of that convention, so our works still qualify as European. Indeed, works could also qualify from Turkey, Israel, and potentially Russia as well. So while the Commission and indeed some other people in Europe may want to stop the UK being such a net exporter into their market going forward, in order to change the rules would be a considerable effort on behalf of the Commission. So what they've currently done is issue a statement asking if there is too much British content on European networks, and that's an issue for member states to answer. I think in the medium term, I don't think we should get too worried. In the longer term, clearly this will be an issue going forward. And of course, longer term means various things. Longer term for animation, it might be 5 years, at which point it's more of a potential material issue, while longer term for maybe a drama being sold into Europe, it may not actually affect any pre-sales or financing. But this is, it's something we really do need to pay attention to, and our government needs to pay attention to. It benefits UK producers because we qualify as European. We get access to all of the European market under those rules. If we weren't European, we'd be foreign acquired, which means we would be in the same bucket as US foreign acquired. And clearly the studios with their considerable catalogues and bundles would potentially distort our ability to sell into those markets as Europeans. So I think this is something we all need to really pay attention to. Our government really needs to pay attention to. Europe is a third of our exports. It's very important. But critically, and I know this will be the case for many of the children's and animation producers who are watching this, our ability to pre-sell our programming into those markets is what allows us to close our financing, which allows us to invest in high quality UK content. And the UK has become one of the leading countries in that. And I think it's very important that we all work together to make sure that we navigate these rocky waters, stormy waters. This was inevitable because of Brexit. This was inevitable coming out of it. But I think it's I wouldn't say it's going to happen tomorrow, but it's something we all need to actually focus on.
I'm sure the government would say, we need to focus on worldwide. There are alternatives. So Phil, what do you make of selling UK content, during this rocky time to worldwide? Is that something that we should all be looking forward to? Is that the alternative to selling to the EU?
Well, the simple answer is yes, but I don't think I can add anything more than John said. The only thing I would say is that throughout this future of children's television, I think we have really got to take on board what the impact of streaming really will be, and I don't think we should be looking at it in terms of territories, because there's no real estate in cyberspace. And one of the interesting things we probably start to be thinking about is we're going to be selling. It's almost thinking about the overseas market being interpreted as expats, as well as sort of the indigenous populations. So, I got nothing really to add on the European dimension, except, but overseas, I think more attention's got to be focused on streaming, and the fact that, how is that going to be regulated? And I think that's going to be extremely difficult, but I know that's something we'll come on to later.
John, did you want to add to that?
Well, the UK is the world's second largest exporter. North America is our second most important market. Asia, Australia, New Zealand, the Nordics, they've all been traditional territories for us. It is surprising, given how small we are relatively to America, that we are the second largest exporter of content and IP in the world. So we've been developing global markets for a long time. I take Phil's point about streamers and what does that mean. But, the UK punches way above its weight in terms of global markets compared to many of our competitors. And that's something we've built over the past, that's something all of us, including children's producers, have built over the past 15 years, really. And that puts us in a very strong position, but we don't want to lose access to one of our key markets. So I think that's the problem. We need to build, but we also need to maintain access as well.
I'm quite interested to know, Mitchell, what Viacom do in terms of, sort of approaching post-Brexit, how you attack the sort of worldwide market with content that you produce, and is it an issue for Viacom?
Well, I think this is a medium-term issue, as John outlined. I think I echo what John said. I think the discussion that has been had internally is about the kind of support we want to ensure that it stays for creativity and collaboration across Europe. You mentioned, Leah, that you're watching Milo this morning, or I presume your kids are watching with you, are watching Milo this morning. Well, that's on ZDF in Germany this morning, that piece of animation. Wow. It's not just being shown in the UK, and there's something, take a piece of content like Odo, which is being produced, which is a beautiful 2D animation about a little owl. When it comes out, I urge people to watch it. It's beautiful, but it's, between Belfast, Poland, in terms of production, and then it's going to be on television in Germany and the UK. So the one thing, wherever we get to in the politics of this, we need to make sure that there is still collaboration across Europe between creators to create incredibly important, positive content for our children to watch. And we need to make sure that wherever the politics ends up, that it doesn't have a chilling effect on the creation of quality content. I think that's the discussion that we've been having internally.
Mm-hmm. I guess moving on now to closer to home, I suppose, with Angela Salt. She is a content creator. She's also a writer, and she's a mum, a teenage son. What she's saying is she believes Channel 4 it's failing its teenage audience. This is all off of the back of Ofcom saying that the channel's failed to serve its teenage audience during the pandemic in particular, as young viewers, I guess, are sort of relying on different platforms for their entertainment, their news and factual. Kate, I guess let's start with you on this one. Is that criticism fair of Channel 4? I guess all broadcasters have had a really tricky time during the pandemic to serve audiences. But what is it about Channel 4 in particular?
So just one thing to sort of kick off. I think I understand the criticism, but just to be clear, we didn't suggest that Channel 4 had failed those audiences. What we set out was some concerns about the investment and the amount of programming aimed at those teenagers. Now we've seen sort of year-on-year decline in that volume and that spend. We've also seen a delay in the launch of their new teen service. So all of that sort of adds up to, this is something we want to monitor quite closely and work closely with Channel 4 on. Now, I think all of that has to be in the context of what has been an extraordinary year for all broadcasters and the production community. And Channel 4 actually responded quite nimbly to that in terms of trying to protect producers in the nations and regions, trying to protect the diversity of its supply, and really growing its social media presence. So I think we shouldn't underestimate the importance of Channel 4 and other public service broadcasters like 5 and ITV and the BBC in reaching out in more innovative ways, particularly over the last year, the importance of news and making sure that there was accurate, impartial information for people, and particularly those younger audiences and those teens in the audience.
What do they do next then, Kate? How do they respond to the changing viewing habits of their teen audience? How do you do that? It's such a tricky one to get on top of.
Absolutely. And I think the ask can feel a bit more, keep doing more with less. And that is the kind of, I guess, the message for a lot of PSBs, that they're sort of struggling. How do you do that? And it's at the heart of our review of public service media. So this isn't unique to Channel 4, as you suggest. It's all traditional broadcasters. How do you reach this audience effectively when they are, quite frankly, spending more minutes on YouTube than they are on broadcast TV? So, and the nature of YouTube, it's a very different service. They're watching music, they're watching how-to prank videos, they're watching a much wider range of content, snippets, user-generated, very different service. They're also spending more time gaming and doing a wider variety of media activities than I think any of us perhaps did in our childhoods. So what's the answer? I think we'll be saying a bit more about this in our recommendations to government for legislative change, because I think there is, as we discussed in our consultation, a need for broadcasters to be flexible and the regulatory system to support them in being innovative, in reaching out, in working in partnership with other platforms, other services, and the production community. So we'll be saying a bit more about that in the coming weeks in our recommendations to government. But I'd be interested actually in hearing what Mitchell has to say as well as a broadcaster.
I guess moving this in a slightly different direction. It's the pandemic has sort of shone a light, hasn't it, on viewing habits and how particularly children, and it's difficult for the traditional broadcasters to suddenly adapt so quickly to catch up with where kids are at. I'm just very quickly, Anne, I was wondering the insights that you got during the pandemic and where children were going to find their information, their entertainment, their factual, because it's difficult for those broadcasters to suddenly change and adapt overnight.
Sure. But I think it was part of a longer term trend that we were seeing, and the pandemic really shone a spotlight on, people's digital use more broadly, and indeed the fact that a lot of kids, or a substantial number, although it's a minority of kids, didn't have access to, in the digital world. So I think it has been fast, and what I find when I talk to kids about where they view and what they view, it is very much about what they do, how they curate it. Obviously, they don't talk about that, but how they curate their own world very much around what their peers are viewing. They talk about it at school. They look at things online. They communicate through and about those things. So it is very organic, but also fast moving. Things can go in and out all the time, and things move on. But I think that is so different from, what might have been the case even a few years ago. What clearly happened during the pandemic was that, especially during lockdown, whole households were together. I think actually you got a slight trend where actually kids were watching some programs. I mean, there was a moment where everyone watched the 5 o'clock briefings. They became kind of the thing. And certainly in terms of news, I think that was certainly for a portion of that time that children started watching. But I mean, I'm still amazed by the fact that kids often will say, well, I don't watch any TV, traditional broadcaster. Or in fact, if they do watch it, it's on their own terms, in their own way, and as part of a collection of pieces that suits them or reflects them.
So what do we do, guys? I mean, there's that gem that you've just said. Everyone was together in the same room watching those briefings. The same, I suppose, with Strictly Come Dancing. It's one of those appointment to view TV shows where everyone is together. Kids are not viewing media in the same way. And I just wonder what Channel 4 do. Phil, is it fair criticism? Can Channel 4 change the tide of this turn? Can they do it?
No, they can't. I think my views are pretty well known about Channel 4 in the media, but I think it was a fantastic idea back in 1982 to bring a really strong impetus to change the whole terrestrial television ecosystem. It's an idea now is well past its sell-by date. I mean, I think the point what you've just been making about teenagers watch what they're interested in and what's relevant to them. You can't just stick and say, this is a teenage program, this is whatever. The thing is that if you keep treating television as a distraction, something that teenagers do when they've got nothing else to do, that's where you lose, because that's where they'll go straight to YouTube. It's the instantaneous, it's the spontaneity, it's so fast. And I think one of the other issues we have to all sort of stand back, take a breath and be realistic about is that I'm afraid, Kate, it's the regulatory regime which turns teenagers away, because all this grey hair here came from those years trying to negotiate through the regulatory maze in getting issues that are really of concern on screen for teenagers. So my view is that, it's a horse that's gone. I think what we need to do in the public service review is really ask that next question now. What do we want from our public service broadcaster in the next 10, 20 years? I think that's got to be a very strong, centralised, unitary public service broadcaster like the BBC. It's got to work out a way of properly funding it. And one of the things to do is actually to merge Channel 4 with BBC, probably stick it into Worldwide or Studios, and let them sell the ad revenue, and all that money that they take in the programme budget can be enhanced because they get rid of all the admin, management, infrastructure, transmission costs, and that huge impetus of cash going into a unified public service broadcaster with a stronger remit in children's and teenage programming. That's the debate we have to have, and I think we've got to be grown up about that now. we fudged around it since 1927, 26, when the BBC was really. It's it's been brilliant. It's an actually ingenious system. But now we're moving into the streaming age, the digital age. We need to say public service broadcasting here, with all the remits, everything we want to do, everything that the children's media is all about, and commercial broadcasting over here, and let the market decide whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. And, that's where regulation, again, needs to be the term flexible, and it needs to take that into a much broader spectrum that's saying public service broadcasters need to be commercial, but not too commercial, and commercial broadcasters be public service broadcasting, but not too much public service broadcasting. So that's my view. It's a new debate where we need to step back, take a breath, and actually look at the next 10 to 20 years. Don't introduce more tinkering into the system. That's the last.
Kate, what do you think?
I won't comment on the sort of future ownership and structure of Channel 4. That is rightly a matter for government and parliament, so I'm not going to go there. But I think you're right. Our regulatory framework largely dates from 2003. It's a world away, right? It's pre-smartphone, it's pre-YouTube, it's pre-Netflix, certainly. And so that's very much at the heart of what we're looking at. How do you modernise our framework? And we're learning. So as we've taken on the regulation of video sharing platforms, what are we learning from that different approach to standards? And what do audiences expect and want in terms of protection? They kind of know best. And that's why research and our kind of understanding of what audiences expect and need, particularly those younger audiences, is really at the heart of what we do as the regulator, to kind of understand, well, are there still differences? Do you expect a programme that's sort of pushed into your home? Do you expect different standards of that from compared to when you're on YouTube or Twitch on your mobile phone? And that's really at the heart of us evolving our regulatory approach, along with legislators like government and parliament, and stakeholders like yourselves who've got some, expertise and insight into the industry.
Could Channel 4, Mitchell, learn from MTV? You guys seem to corner that teen market quite well.
Well, I would actually go the other way, and I would say that I think we would say that the biggest success in PSB broadcasting over the last few years, to blow our own trumpets, has been Channel 5, in the way that Channel 5 has been able to recognise that actually, I would argue that each PSB plays a differentiated and slightly different place in the market. And so, Leah, you referred to Saturday night, people watching Strictly, but for the people who don't want to watch Strictly, what else is there on a Saturday night on Channel 5 or on ITV or on Channel 4? And I think we have a really wonderful PSB ecology in the UK where there's a kind of complementarity between the different PSBs. And I think for us, that's really important. And Channel 5 is trying to find a space that is, kids content is hugely important for us. The only service that has a kind of a linear section on its linear feed, the main channel has kids content every single morning, every single day of the year. And we think that's crucially important. And the kind of content that you'll get there is different. And I think the PSB is different, to kind of pick up on Kate's point, that people do feel that when they're watching PSBs, any of them, ITV, BBC, Channel 4 or Channel 5, that they're getting something that reflects their own lives back to them in some way, that the regulations that are imposed on PSB ensure that it's UK content that feels really authentic. And I think that's what we as a PSB are trying to do. And I think that's where you'll see the kids' content, so you're watching Milo this morning, you're watching Peppa Pig this morning. And I'm not entirely sure whether you may watch that on a commercial service or you may not, but the origination of these kinds of shows happens because of PSB and the engine that the PSBs are for UK originated content. So I think it's really important. And I think the viewer does understand that, maybe not in the kind of language of public service broadcasting and license obligations, but there's a kind of feel and a sense that when they sit down to watch the news on the BBC or on Channel 5, it's different to when they watch the news from an international broadcaster. I think that's something that is difficult to kind of put a finger on exactly, but I think it's something that's important to recognise.
I guess it's choice, isn't it? And it's knowing that choice exists too. John, last question with you. I suppose what your thoughts are on privatising Channel 4? Because the government wanted
Yeah, well,
to make this a reality.
Well, it's quite hard to understand what the government's rationale, because they won't be publishing any evidence or impact assessment for us to actually inquire, leaving Phil's point about purposes aside, just as a sort of fiscal issue. I asked John Whittingdale last week on a similar conference whether the government would be publishing that information, was told absolutely not. This is a sort of seeking evidence about why we should privatise Channel 4. So I think this might be policy-led evidence rather than evidence-led policy, and that's disturbing in itself. But the one rationale which the government seems to have been focusing on is Channel 4 needs more access to capital in order to compete in a world of streamers and bigger budgets. We don't necessarily agree that it's always about bigger budgets. It may be bigger editorial, maybe bigger focus on who you're trying to serve, and being more aligned to that, much as Mitchell's been saying. But merging it into the BBC doesn't give you access to greater capital, because the BBC is subject to public borrowing. So if you were merging it into BBC Studios, the BBC's capacity to borrow more money from the government is capped anyway. So while that may seem to be a nice regulatory fix, it doesn't seem to address the government's own thesis, which is that the Channel 4 needs much, much more capital in order to succeed going forward and end up not being a burden on the British taxpayer. So, we're questioning all of this. We'll be doing a lot of work showing the long-term value chain of Channel 4 investment and origination. And I think Mitchell's point about PSB, at the heart of PSB is us investing in British content. And going back to our earlier question about exports, if we don't do that, we will lose that. We will lose all the benefits that brings to our creative economy, to our talent, to diversity, skills, inclusion. That money all comes back into our economy, and we use it very creatively compared to many of our competitors. And Channel 4 is an important part of that, because it's a publisher broadcaster. It's not allowed to make its own programming, which sustains hundreds of companies across the UK.
Gosh, we could discuss this for so much longer, but I will move on to our next question. And it comes from Julia Posen, a senior media consultant. She says, Secretary of State Oliver Dowden plans to extend Ofcom's remit to include international streamers like Netflix and Disney Plus. She wants to know, how will this be possible, given that Netflix, for example, is based in the Netherlands? Will this level the playing field for companies such as ITV and the BBC? I mean, Kate, is this something that you're keen on? Is it something that would work? How would you make it work? So many questions.
I think we're still waiting to see the detail. So this is something government's going to be consulting on again. So it's I'm afraid it's a bit of a kind of let's wait and see. The only thing I would mention is we do already regulate some of these services. So Disney Plus is a notified service in the UK. So we already have a relationship with a number of video on demand service providers, which means there is some surety around the quality of content, and we have a relationship there. So I think what we're interested in is keeping sight of what matters to UK audiences. What are their habits? How are they evolving? And I think, as Anne said, it wasn't sort of big bang with the pandemic, but it did speed up existing habits. So we'd already seen children moving more and more onto mobile devices, more and more onto services like YouTube, Twitch, Netflix, Disney and others. And that's just been sped up during the pandemic. And so we're sort of monitoring that and monitoring what the content is. And as Mitchell highlighted, there is a distinction currently between some of those British broadcasters, the amount of UK content on their services, including on their on-demand services, compared to an on-demand service, whether it be Disney or Netflix or Amazon Prime. They do look and feel quite different in terms of the range of content and the amount of British content.
And Anne, with the government now publishing this online safety bill, how do you think it's going to impact content makers? Because will it have any effect, I suppose, on YouTube, where, anything goes really, and it can be quite damaging for brands or, not great for kids to watch certain content? What's your thoughts?
Sure. Sure. And I guess following on from Kate's point, especially around Netflix, we know that Netflix is kind of the go-to of choice, and kids are spending, huge amounts of their time there and on YouTube. So I think it is important that, that's a community that kids are, growing up in. And for very much smaller children, I think they're still very much tied to traditional broadcast. But for older kids, they're spending huge amounts of time on that. In terms of the Online Harms Bill, I mean, I pushed for it for a long time. I think the important part of it is that it relies on the service provider to justify and show how they are being responsible. Because one of the dangers was going to be that, it came up with some elaborate way of doing it, and then obviously in 10 minutes time it was out of date. But this is around justifying and about demonstrating that you are taking this seriously. And alongside the Information Commissioner's age appropriate design as well, which is very useful in terms of data for the data side of things. But I think this will mean that there will need to be much more reflection on what the impact of content is, and a really transparent process, and being able to describe that you not only know who your users are, but that you know what their vulnerabilities are, if you like, in the broadest sense, and that those are being taken into consideration, and action is being taken if things are being highlighted as potentially causing harm. So I do think it is a major move. It will need some teeth, and again, over to Ofcom on lots of that. I know that's reports are that there have been lots of people being employed to look at this, but certainly I do think it is a game changer, and one that everyone really will need to take account of if it can have the teeth I think it needs.
Just some breaking news, actually, guys. I didn't think I'd be able to do this on this session, but harking back to my newsround days, the French industry have come out and backed streaming reforms. So it's a group of independent producers in France. They've come out in support of proposed local regulations, and that basically would see streamers forced to hand over at least 20% of their annual revenues to the government. What's your reaction to that? I mean, would you encourage something like that to happen in this country, John?
Well, I mean, there's already powers in the Audiovisual Media Services Directive, and all the streamers are subject to those in Europe anyway, where they must spend 30% minimum on European content on their services. The French producers will always seek to put levies on services in their market. Yeah. They do it on everything. There's levies on cinema tickets, on everything else, and that goes through an organisation called the CNC, which then distributes those funds to producers. The UK has actually done pretty well out of the streamers so far. Certainly Netflix spend domestically is in excess of what you would see in Europe. So, and that's because we have great creativity, great producers, and great talent to make productions here. I'm not saying the French don't, but I think that's probably not the way our government will go, I would suspect. But I'm not surprised the French producers ask for that, because they always ask for levies on anything in France. So.
That's fine. Thank you, John, on that one. Breaking news. So the French industry are backing these reforms. I want to move over to sort of those social media platforms that Anne was touching on very briefly, because it's clear that kids after a certain age, so we're talking 6 upwards, are looking to TikTok or YouTube. Kate, Phil, how do we make those platforms more child friendly? Is it even possible to do that? I know at Newsround we were looking into getting a TikTok account, but there were so many rules and issues around that we just couldn't do it. Is there a way in the future that these platforms can be kid-friendly?
Well, I'm very happy to kick that over to Kate for the regulatory thing, but technically I think it's going to be extremely difficult. Yeah. You might be able to one particular platform or one particular producer, but they'll just disappear and someone else will crop up. You've got to keep coming back all the time, saying that there's no real estate in cyberspace. It's one of the big things the newspaper industry completely got wrong when they started to give away their content, and then that actually crucified their print sector. Because the newspaper's model was always a competitor sets up, they set up an alternative newspaper at a discount, they subsidise it till they kill the competition. Now you just can't do that in cyberspace. So I think this is where we really need to sort of to take on board where we are and where we're going. And you've already referenced the pandemic, which has been called the Great Accelerator. Trying to regulate things cross borders in the digital age is going to be extremely difficult unless we move into a regime like China, where every IP is geotagged, and I don't think that's something we'd ever countenance. And all these discussions bring me all the way back to the one point, which is that where the public are very happy to pay a tax for content, and rather than a levy or a subsidy or whatever, is the BBC license fee, and that's what we have to protect, not the actual fee itself, but the public's willingness to contribute to that cultural fund, and that's where we have to go back to. That's the only thing I can offer to this thing. Right? So just do not think it's going to be possible to regulate a particular provider. And finally, just throw one more thing into this. One of the bigger dangers is not actually commercial providers, it's user-generated content. I mean, the way people can now take everything. I mean, I saw the reference to porn Peppa Pig. It's that kind of thing which is going to be extremely difficult to regulate too. But we need to get to a position, I've done it before, about how people view perhaps Channel 5, Channel 4 slightly different than elsewhere. And that's about brand awareness, and that's about people trusting a brand. So it's this building a trust within the audience. So that's about as much as I can bring to this at the time. But
it's great insight. It's that rise, isn't it, of fake news. And when you do have platforms like, for example, TikTok, YouTube, it's not only a safety issue, but it's false news and generating user-generated content. How, as an organisation, will Ofcom get a handle on that?
So we've already started regulating video sharing platforms. So I'd say we're sort of already learning and having a role in ensuring that those video sharing platforms that fall within our jurisdiction are conducting themselves in a way that's protecting sort of their users from harm. So, and I think this is the start of a journey as the online safety bill progresses and our powers evolve and change. So I think it is possible. In fact, it is definitely possible. We're doing it, and it's just going to be a learning process. I think what I would say is we shouldn't lose the positive side of this. So it can be an incredibly creative and wonderful place for children. They are being able to create content themselves and share it with their friends, with their classmates, with their family. And we shouldn't forget the positive side of some of these services and platforms. It's how do you promote and protect that good stuff whilst protecting children from the most egregious harms. And I think as the regulator striking that balance, that's what has to be our focus as we start to develop our regulatory role. And as you say, expand into online safety more broadly.
Anne, are you happy with the safety that's online for children at the moment?
Well, I mean, I want providers to do more, and, the online harm bill will be one catalyst to do that. But I mean, I think that one thing that really bothers me is that, yes, there can be all the creative stuff, and clearly kids are choosing to be there. So, it's not that they've been forced into those environments. But where does that leave traditional broadcasters in 10 years' time, in 15 years' time? Because actually you've got an audience of kids that are under 25, or some older kids, older than others, but where they don't think in terms of live TV or indeed of particular channels so much. And, I think that is a great loss because, the depth of content and the quality of content is something that I would love kids to have access to. But somehow in the way it's produced at the moment, or the way it's presented at the moment, they seem to be going to other places where they don't have that. And I don't have the technical answers, but how do you actually merge those two environments for the future would be something that I think is of huge importance.
Our next question is from Kath Shackleton. Guys, she's a producer from Fettle Animation. She says, should the Department for Culture, Media and Sport have cut 25% from the last year of the Young Audience Content Fund? And what will happen to the fund now? John, do you have any thoughts on that you could share with us?
Well, I'm very disappointed that they did cut the funds. I was involved in setting that up. Originally, it wasn't just a children's fund. It was going to be a top slicing fund for all content. And we campaigned to put the funding to where we saw the biggest market failure, which was in children's, and historically had been. And that, coupled with the tax credit we got introduced, we thought would be some way to actually, not maybe turn the tide, but at least float the boat of children's content back on to the PSBs. And indeed, it's been successful in doing that. So we're very sad that the government's decided to cut it in light of the economics of the pandemic. Maybe understandable, but disappointing. Why do the kids always get it, sort of thing? And I know, Channel 5, ITV, Channel 4, and the BBC, not the BBC, have all been using this fund success projects that otherwise probably wouldn't have got on air. So it was a very good intervention and very carefully structured to work with the market rather than impose some weird process. Where it goes after this, I don't know, because the fund is a grant, so it's not recoupable, it's not going back into the fund. It's a grant to the producers and effectively the broadcasters to fund the content. The money came originally from a top slice of the BBC for broadband rollout, and it was what was left over. And we managed to make sure it went into the kids fund. How you fund it going forward in light of the economics post-pandemic, I think is a matter for Rishi Sunak and Oliver Dowden rather than me. But I hope they do find a way to make it continue. Otherwise, I fear we'll be back to where we were before the fund was set up, which is a deficit in children's funding children's programming.
I mean, if it does continue, Mitchell, where do you think the money should come from? Because there are a lot of people that will want it to continue.
Yeah, well, before I touch on the money question, which I'll get to, but I just think it's worth just reiterating what John said, because Channel 5 has been the beneficiary of managing to create 10 projects through the Young Audience Content Fund. And there's been a significant challenge for kids TV, which is that if you want to make really, if you want to make real specific PSB type UK originated content that genuinely reflects how people live their lives and children live their lives back to them, unfortunately, it's not going to travel very well on the secondary rights market. You can make an animation, beautiful animation that can then be equally, simply translated into numerous different languages and go around the world. But when you want to make something that's authentic, that's live action, that features British kids, it's really, really tough to make. And this fund, the contestable funding model, has really blown that out of the water and really allowed in projects, exactly as John said, that wouldn't be able to get made. So you've got things like The World According to Grandpa, which is a fantastic program. You've got things like to the earlier comment, the Going Green with the Grimwades, which was actually YouTube influencer family who now have found it onto kind of traditional television. So I think it's incredibly important. Actually, contestable funding as a broader model, we have argued in the PSB review, is really important. So the financing question, my first point would be that this is a relatively small amount of money. So it's £54 million over 3 years, relatively speaking, in what the government's been spending on things. But the amount that leverages in terms of kind of cultural value and importance in terms of for kids, families, the feedback that we get on some of these programs about, it's great to be able to see people that look like me on TV. It's fantastic you're touching on issues that aren't normally touched on. It's great, all this feedback. There's a significant value which I believe goes way beyond the relatively small amount of investment it takes. So where the money is going to come from, I don't have the answer to that. But I do think that Treasury, need to look at this not just as a kind of on sort of a spreadsheet of kind of pluses and minuses, but they need to also, and I hope that Oliver Dowden and colleagues at DCMS will be making that point very clearly, that this is about the more than just the numbers. It's about what that creates in terms of the benefits of children's content to society at large.
What do you make of the change of funding, Phil, over the years that you've been in sort of working in kids media? Because we're at a stage now where there are programmes that, if I was 10 years old and watching World According to Grandpa, it would have been a big deal for me. And I didn't have that when I was a kid. What do you think about, A, the funding, and B, how, we're able to reflect a vast array of different people on screen in animation and drama?
Yeah, it can only be a good thing, and it has been a good thing. I think John's right. I think it's probably all inevitable that as the pandemic starts to fade, the government will then start trying to claw back all the cash that it's put out. It's happening not just in children's media. But I think there's actually two underlying points in this. One is that, again, John's point about more money always brings more programming and brings better results. Mitchell's outlined that very eloquently. But the other point is that where the money originally came from, and John said it came from in the BBC. And that to me is another kind of a tinkering issue we've allowed ourselves to slip into over the next 10 years. I've just got to keep coming back to this point. I'm almost feeling like slipping into the politician thing and saying I'll refer my learned colleagues to my earlier answer. Point is that if that money, instead of being top sliced for broadband or whatever, had been said, okay, we'll put that straight into children's programming. Can you just get on with it? And that's the debate we've got to have. We've got to make sure that we stop all this tinkering around the edges and then having sort of threat and debates every 2 or 3 years, but have a long, sensible debate about how we want to structure ourselves moving into the digital age.
Guys, before we go, I want to get this one last question in. This is from Gregory Boardman, and he said he's a teacher stressing the importance of public service media in the fabric of our young lives. He's saying, however, evidence suggests that in the UK, we're investing less in our public service media content for the young. And as we've been touching on, the Young Audience Content Fund was introduced to deal with the market failure, with the regard of production and diverse and relevant young people's content, as we've been discussing. Is there further evidence the UK society is neglecting the needs of our young people? If funding is cut further, are we failing our young audiences? Because that really ties in what this whole conference is all about promoting, isn't it? Out the young, the future of children. Are we failing if we don't protect this, if government don't protect the fund? John?
Well, we've been failing for some time. In the 2003 Communications Act, the one thing they didn't put in the legislation was children's programming. It was a requirement of the PSB licenses, so that allowed various broadcasters to basically exit children's programming, which was what precipitated the decline. And then we had restrictions introduced by Andy Burnham on HFSS, which made it even more commercially difficult. And the fund was really one intervention, an imperfect one, maybe to Phil's point about the longer term debate. And it goes to the heart of what we were talking about earlier. If we want children, younger people to engage in PSB, we have to give them something to watch. We have to give them something that resonates, which feels realistic and authentic and relevant. And if we don't, then YouTube and TikTok and Twitch and all the other platforms where they can go online with their mates and they can maybe encounter things they shouldn't be encountering is what will happen. So it's not just a fiscal issue, to post. I think this is a really important societal and cultural issue about if we want our kids to care about what they see on their box or their screen, we have to make stuff for them. It's an editorial challenge for the broadcasters and an economic challenge for our society, and we need to fund it properly. And if we don't, then we will be having this debate about social media platforms going forward for forever, and we'll be all wringing our hands. And indeed, as my kids grow up and become parents, they'll be wringing their hands about it. So, I think it's a fundamental issue. And as we move forward and hopefully get to the spending review, this is something government will take very seriously and maintain the Children's Fund or increase investment to help the broadcasters do even more exciting things, even more challenging things that we all feel we should be doing.
John, I don't think anyone could have put it better there. And I think at that point, we'll bring this panel to a close. And I just want to thank you all for your thoughts, your insight. But it's left me feeling with a sense that there is a lot to still look forward to. We do have the creative minds in this country. We're able to make a difference. And that's what we have to keep promoting. So thank you very much, all of you, for your time. And stay safe. But guys at home, watching at home, as promised, we'll be hearing from our campaign changemaker, Gabby, in just a second. First, a couple of words about what's coming up next. I'm sure you're all waiting to hear what's coming up. Remember, the Wonder Chat starts as soon as this session is over. And here on the platform, the next session is at 2, and that's the Commissioner conversation with CITV Milkshake, S4C and the Young Audience Content Fund, hosted by the lovely Chris Jarvis from CBeebies. So it's a goodbye from all of us, and we'll give the last word to Gabby Tan, shall we, our change maker. Gabby is an advocate for quality education, mental health and environmental action. She's also a member of the World Ocean Day Youth Advisory Council and Horizon of Hope, a youth-led project supporting refugee education, and her most recent passion project, Tide Turners, which increases awareness of environmental issues and puts young people at the heart of solutions. And she's also spoken at the UN Youth Climate Summits, and now she's here to speak to us about how we can make a difference. Take a look.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Gabby and I'm so honored to be with you as one of the CMC Changemakers this year. I'm a student who just wrapped up my first year at university, and I've also spent the last 6 years or so working on various projects and campaigns related to youth empowerment, education, mental health, and environmental action. I've had the special opportunity to work with over a dozen different youth groups, organizations, and projects all around the world. Together with my fellow youth advocates, we fundraise for issues including refugee education, campaigned in Parliament, striked for our climate, launched petitions, and made classroom resources on mental health and climate change. It's been so inspiring to go from conference to conference and meet so many amazing friends and young people around the world. However, at the same time, I noticed a common frustration about the themes and topics that young people felt were missing from schools and the media. Our world, the reality we face and see every day, as well as the issues we cared about most, such as climate change, justice, and mental health, were not truly being reflected by what we were seeing in the media. The first issue I'd like to cover is mental health. COVID, the lockdowns, school closures, and huge uncertainty has exacerbated youth mental health issues across the world. For instance, according to UNICEF, 27% of young people feel anxiety and 15% feel depressed, while 30% of survey respondents attributed their mental health issues to COVID-related stressors. Globally, 23% of the world's youth experience a mental health condition. In the UK specifically, according to the Mental Health Foundation, around 20% of adolescents may experience a mental health problem in any given year, and 10% of children and young people currently deal with a clinically diagnosable mental problem. Though poor mental health is experienced by so many youth, it is still heavily stigmatized and remains a huge taboo topic across households and communities around the world. Together, we all have a part to play in building a kinder, more inclusive society where no one has to suffer in silence and no one feels shame in speaking up and seeking help. In particular, I think the media has a huge role in helping to break down the stigma and spreading awareness about the importance of mental health. Several surveys have shown that the way mental health is portrayed in mass media contributes significantly to the misconceptions and beliefs that fuel the stigma associated with mental health. For instance, in TV shows, films, and the news, mentally ill people are often dramatized as violent, crazy, unpredictable, or shameful. While coverage on mental health issues has increased in recent years and has been hugely impactful, for example, one survey by Mind found that 25% of youth who had mental health issues felt empowered and encouraged to seek help after watching TV shows involving a character with a mental illness. I think there's so much more that can be done. For example, when creating ads focusing on health such as Eat Them to Defeat Them, we could also take the opportunity to emphasize the importance of both physical and mental health to young people, because mental health is such a inseparable, huge, and crucial part of overall health. Integrating conversations about mental health with children's media content, encouraging young people to speak up, and informing them about issues that they might experience over time is so important and will help foster a culture where mental health is talked about widely and freely. Along the same lines, I'd also love to highlight another issue, which is eco-anxiety. In fact, 70% of youth in the US and UK surveyed feel some form of eco-anxiety, and half of child psychologists surveyed in the UK reported seeing patients who are distressed about environmental and ecological issues beyond a natural concern for our environment. You might be wondering what eco-anxiety is, as it's a relatively new term. The American Psychology Association defined it as the chronic fear of environmental disaster that comes from observing seemingly irrevocable impact of climate change and the associated concern for one's future and that of next generations. Much of it is fueled by the doom and gloom of climate change in the media. Having felt helpless and overwhelmed by the endless news about deadlines, tipping points, extinction, and disaster, I found that focusing on what we can do left me so much more inspired and motivated. Though telling it like it is with the facts and science is no doubt so important, I think that oftentimes too much of the focus is placed on the crisis we're in and not enough on the ways we can get out of it. At university and through my environmental education project Tide Turners, I've been researching climate solutions and effective climate communication strategies. Instead of adding to the fear that so many young people feel in the face of climate change, I've also learned that conveying climate topics through storytelling and highlighting climate solutions as well as what we can do together is so helpful in enabling young people to channel feelings of helplessness into agency. I think the media has such a special and important role in translating climate issues, science, and solutions into digestible and empowering content. All in all, I think it is so important that the media is recognizing, talking about, and addressing the issues that are on the top of young people's minds. Two examples being mental health and the eco-anxiety and despair in the face of climate change. To everyone from the children's media industry watching, firstly, thank you for listening. And lastly, I really look forward to the conversations and change that you will help ignite.